It's a good tuna, but I think I paid too much.
I always wear my mask and wash my hands after going home.
I am the king of the ring.
Welcome to the Japan WUT podcast, episode 220. And I am your host, Matthew P.M. Bigelow.com. And I'm coming at you from the Aizumicho Studios in Shinjuku, Tokyo, Japan, the armpit of Asia, covering Japan Society 5.0, AI market trends, rising conflict in the Indo-Pacific, the supply chain wars, dynamics of populations, and more. We thank you for coming along the adventure that is today's show. Another busy day. I'm a busy guy. How about you? Keeping busy? We're going through this heat wave right now in Tokyo, and it's just better to stay in. I'm usually out and about in the summer type guy, but once it reaches like 35 degrees in maximum humidity by 9 a.m., that's basically some sort of spirit saying, go and podcast. Don't go outside today. Get in front of that mic. Thanks for listening for the past couple of shows. I've been getting good feedback on the AI music podcasts that I've been doing. Got to go check those out. Even if you think that it's stupid, and it may very well be, the level of production that this stuff is able to make right now is it's marching over the uncanny valley. And that's where the valley where human perception is unable to determine whether something is AI or not. If you had this playing in the background at some party, you wouldn't think that it was a computer at all. So go check those out. And thanks a lot for, I got good comments about the last podcast I did about the rise of populism and technocracy in Japan following the last election there. The only reason I don't really like covering elections because it's a bunch of brouhaha and then nothing. But it was significant because we're seeing massive breaks in the dynamics and population demographics in Japan, branching off from each other and thinking about other ways that the country can go. And as you know, in the past 10 years, it's been a rather politically disruptive time, and just tracking it, because if you're aware of what's going on now, you won't be caught flat-footed later. So go and check that out. Thank you. So today we're going to be taking mainly a look at two things here: the supply chain war and Japan Society 5.0. So let's take a look at the war. Die for the war, everybody moves. Die for the good, die for the war, die for the war. The supply chain wars really kicked off for me in 2020, as I like to say, when I had never heard of the city called Wuhan, and you look into it. And of course, they had the Wuhan Institute of Virology there, right where that virus came out of. But of course, it was climate change via a third mammal that eventually went into a pangolin that caused COVID-19, right? Right. But also, if you look beyond the ties to COVID, Wuhan was a center of manufacturing, telecommunications, telecom, like security equipment, chips, cars. Basically, if something was going through the supply chains, odds are Wuhan had a part in it. And I had never known that before. And you look at Wuhan on the map and you're like, well, it's way deep inside China. And China's this kind of an authoritarian state. And so I was kind of going, well, why did all these companies all over the world put their manufacturing in a place so deep inside China that the Chinese government could just come and block it off? And that's what they did. And then we had this massive disruption in the supply chains. And that's where I got this idea of the supply chain wars. And then you look at the conflicts that started sprouting up, Ukraine and Russia, which is G7 on one side and BRICS on the other, Taiwan and China, BRICS on one side, G7 on the other. Look, Israel and Iran, or Israel and Palestine, Gaza, well, BRICS on one side and G7 on the other. And all these places kind of fit along these trade routes or resources and access and things like that. So I got this idea in my head that we're actually going through a supply chain war, and I had worked in telecoms from 2015 to 2020 in Japan as an AI school. I made an AI school, and I just built it myself, and I taught these high-level corporate executives AI market trends for 5 years, sitting in rooms alone with them. You learn a lot about the world when you do that. And I did. So this idea of the supply chain war also came to me because of the ties this company had to China and looking at what China was doing with AI infrastructure at the time as well, building up its ships, building up its satellites, building up its payment processing systems and tying them together and kind of looking at where this was going and kind of saying, well, China wants to probably get rid of using the dollar for trade. The one way that it could do that is instead of competing with the U.S. dollar, it would create its own system and wall it off, just like it's been doing within its own country for a very long time now. And now that they have the QR code payments and the satellites and the telecommunications infrastructure and the technology, they can go ahead and do that. And that's kind of what they've been doing. And I've been talking about this for years, and it's been highly speculative, but you just look at what else would you use the technology for if you could expand it in that way? Why wouldn't you? Why? And the example I like to give is that while these ships can be carrying resources for national interest, like copper or some sort of mining or ore from one country to another country, well, those same ships could also be carrying consumables or goods that each country's people are using. So, for example, China could barter with a country and say, we will give you this 5G equipment if you give us a lot of cocoa, and okay. But at the same time, room could be on that ship, or there could be other ships, on the same supply chain route where the residents of a place like Beijing could be ordering coffee beans or ordering something from China, and that the farmer on the other end in Africa would be using Chinese technology as well. So you could also authorize payment systems from one phone to another phone via Chinese networks and have the payment be done in renminbi or in a mutually, beneficial, like a bilateral trade agreement, and skirt the U.S. dollar completely. And that's kind of what I was thinking and what I was seeing. And now we see more and more satellite sharing technology going on between China and African countries. And it kind of goes on from there. So it's a little bit of a preamble. And I've been saying this for like years now, mostly to deaf ears. But I'd like to begin with a news article here. And we're recording this towards the end of July 2025. And this is not a breaking news podcast because I don't like breaking news. It's just like, look what's happening, react now. And I hate it. So this comes to us from July 10th from the Daily News of Egypt, dailynewsegypt.com. And it says, Egypt and China central banks sign pacts to boost yuan use and payment systems. And I was like, wow, that's a kind of validation. Not a lot of people talk about infrastructure and trade, or if they do, they don't really line it up to long-term national interests to break the U.S. dollar hegemon or reserve currency of the globe. But that's what's happening step by step. Today, we're going to be looking at these types of pacts and measures and showing where the rifts and the seams are being created or loosened up around the world around trade and technology. Let me read. The central banks of Egypt and China on Tuesday, this is July 10th, signed 3 memoranda of understanding aimed at promoting the use of the Chinese yuan and expanding electronic payment cooperation, the Central Bank of Egypt said in a statement, the CBE. Wow. Well, that just summarized everything I've been talking about for 5 years. The signings took place after a meeting between CBE Governor Hassan Abdallah and his counterpart from the People's Bank of China, Pang Gongsheng, at the CBE's headquarters in Cairo during the Chinese officials' current visit to Egypt. During the talks, the two officials discussed several key topics, including a currency swap agreement, settling payments in local currencies, Egypt's issuance of panda bonds in the Chinese market, and linking their respective payment systems. The statement said, linking their respective payment systems. Via the technology, via the payment systems. I was studying fintech a hell of a lot at this time. And what I realized is that you have endpoints from one country's system to another country's system. And with China, it's Union Pay. So you can connect into Union Pay. Now you have access to the Chinese market. But if China doesn't like you, then they cut off that access point, and now you don't have access into the Chinese market. China did a similar thing with Hong Kong, basically, where over time they were able to use Hong Kong as a global straw to suck everything into China and have only what they wanted to go out of China. So it was a very tiny little door in their great firewall that they have going on there. So they're doing a yes and strategy by saying now we can use this for global payment systems to boost our yuan use or to not use the dollar to create our own systems. So these central banks also affirmed the importance of increasing the presence of each other's banks to encourage joint investment. One of the agreements was signed between the Suez Canal Bank, TEDA China Africa Investment Co., and the operator of China's cross-border interbank payment system. It aims to promote and encourage the use of the Chinese yuan within the China-Egypt Trade and Economic Cooperation Zone. China's UnionPay, there it is, signed 2 protocols. The first, with the Egyptian Bank's Company for Technological Advancement, aims to improve e-payment infrastructure and expand the acceptance of UnionPay cards into the Egyptian market. The second, with fintech from PayMob, focuses on cooperation and marketing electronic payment and acceptance services for UnionPay cardholders. In the statement, they welcome the visit, and the agreements underscore the efforts by both countries to enhance their strategic partnership and support economic integration by developing financial infrastructure and expanding cooperation in digital payments. So it's all good on paper. Notice how they're not promoting like the G7 and a lot of G7 investment or bankers or pension funds will say, if you don't put 50% of the women on the board, we're not going to invest in you. And they go, what? They say, well, you don't have enough LGBTQ signage in your corporate head offices. You got to get that up too. And they go, what? And then China comes along. It's like, look at our technology. Let's do business. Now, of course, China might have a longer term vision for maybe, expanding more and more into Egypt and to perhaps make Egypt just a little bit more Chinese. But at the same time, if you're Egypt, what do you do? What do you do indeed? So I just thought that was, I read that and I was kind of going, oh, wow, that's everything I've been talking about for the past 5 years. Everything from UnionPay to the trade agreements to using each other's currencies to, in the electronic systems. It's everything. And it's coming to truth. It's coming to light right now. Of course, I say these things and it doesn't sound nutty. It just sounds far-fetched. Or it's like, why isn't anyone else talking about it? Because nobody is. But there it is, right now, right here, right now. China and Egypt signing with each other the usage of the yuan and Chinese financial markets and technologies to bolster tightening of relations. So there's that one. Let's So that's not about Japan, but the Japan falls into the G7 on one side and the BRICS on the other. And I think it's just important to understand what's going on in rival systems so you can better understand, not you, so that we can all better understand what's going on. But to come back to Japan now, because I said this is kind of an exploration of where the seams are tightening or unraveling or shifting here and there. Japan is in a unique situation because it's geographically anchored in Asia, very much so, sharing maritime borders with several key BRICS nations such as Russia and China, but also friendly nations such as North Korea, and also sharing a maritime border with Taiwan and, a whole bunch of other countries, not a whole bunch of other, but, it's in that area, but kind of ideologically, post-World War II, systemically, it's anchored in the G7 and the USA way of doing things. You can come over to Japan and just be amazed at how many people are walking in Tokyo, where I am, are walking around in business suits, going into cafes. It looks like a modern business society. Historically, though, you go back 100 years and everybody's wearing robes and stuff like that, and you can still find that. But in terms of the way that the post-World War II society is organized and operates, it's very much a G7 country. So there's this conflict where it's anchored geographically on the borders with very high performing countries now, but it's also systematically incorporated into more of a Western framework. So there was this U.S. trade deal. And what I've been doing recently is instead of just reading the news, a lot of the times I'm trying to get large language models to rewrite information into the bias that the Japan WUT podcast takes in the supply chain wars. And that's what's happening right now with the recent U.S. Japan trade deal. And this relates to the Indo-Pacific supply chain dynamics. But instead of getting it to write news articles, I'm trying to get it to write intelligence agency style briefings so that we get away from the whole news way of doing things. Because the news is filled now with a lot of fluff. And I was hoping, but intelligence reports are focusing more on the technical details and tying technical details to other technical details. So I want to use large language models to incorporate this bias that I've been talking about with the supply chain wars into the information, just the strict information that's coming out of these meetings for the negotiations. And so right now, of course, the U.S. is very wise to these movements that China's been taking to create its own reserve currency. But the U.S. wants to maintain its status as a reserve currency holder. Why wouldn't they? So they kind of have Japan by the balls in many ways. And Japan's always trying to play both sides. It can do it pretty well. Other countries do it maybe perhaps a little bit better, such as Malaysia, but they're much smaller players in the long run or in the current run. Anyway, so this is how the article frames this, and we're looking here at the edge of empire. If you live in the edge of empire, you could easily fall into one empire or be at the crisis nexus point of the previous empire as it's collapsing or expanding and then collapsing and then expanding again. That's how borders operate. The U.S. Japan trade agreement finalized on July 23, 2025, which, by the way, was right after an election, reshapes the Indo-Pacific supply chain dynamics, placing Japan at the heart of the G7 BRICS rivalry. Japan, a G7 member and U.S. ally, faces a complex strategic landscape due to its maritime borders with BRICS nations like Russia and China, as well as BRICS-friendly states such as North Korea. The deal commits Japan to a $550 billion investment in U.S. semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and energy, along with increased imports of American cars, rice, and agricultural products, and $17 billion annually in U.S. defense equipment. I'll just pause it there. Number 3 at the Pentagon, Mr. Elbridge Colby, Bridge, he uses his official X account now for the government, but before he was hired to be the Pentagon number 3, he followed me on Twitter or an X, and we'd shared some information, and he helped out with the podcast a bit, kind of inadvertently by just directing me towards AI research capabilities in China and stuff like that. But by really, I consumed a lot of his materials. And one thing that he's always pushing for now is that U.S. allies need to stop relying on the U.S. to the extent that they do for the actual military presence. And they need to start allocating 3%, 4%, 5%, the number keeps going up, Mr. Colby, of their GDP towards defense spending. But of course, would the USA allow Japan to allocate 5% of its GDP to defense spending to purchase Chinese-made or Russian-made goods? No. It's going to be USA-made goods or domestically made goods or AUKUS or Quad-made goods, but ideally American-made goods. So if all of these USA-friendly countries are committing from 3 to 4 to 5% of their GDP now to arms, it's kind of like instead of giving it to NATO, 2% of your annual GDP to NATO, America is now just kind of becoming this distribution network. Instead of relying on NATO, it might be pushing countries to spend more money on its own defenses, but then the U.S. collects 3 to 5% of how many countries' GDP annually to sell weapons to them. I mean, this is looking like a major deal for the USA. Of course, they frame it in such ways like, you can't rely on us anymore. It's time to step up. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and develop your own defenses. Of course, we'll sell those to you every year. And we'll sell them to you, and we'll sell them to you, and we'll sell them to you, and we'll sell them to you. Now we have $18 billion a year coming from Japan and $22 billion a year coming from here, $3 billion from here, $7 billion from there. So instead of it just being allocated to the NATO bureaucracy, it's just like a more of a direct sales. It's strategic. It's kind of dirty. It's kind of dirty. Where was I? Here we go. By lowering U.S. tariffs on Japanese autos from a threatened 25% to 15%, the agreement deepens Japan's integration into G7 supply chains, particularly in critical technologies, and reducing reliance on China. This aligns with G7 efforts, right? Because if you invest $550 billion into technology in one country, can you just maintain the spend on other countries? Probably not. This aligns with G7 efforts to counter BRICS influence through initiatives like the Quad and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, bolstering ties to the U.S. This also has to do with U.S. countering China's expansionary efforts. For example, bombing Iran, tried to push Iran from China. China imports a lot of its oil from Iran. Now the USA has lifted sanctions on Myanmar, and of course Myanmar is to the south of China, getting Japanese business interests away from China back into the U.S. So there's like this encirclement of economic ties that are opening up. But most of these countries now are so used to the U.S. totally flip-flopping every 4 years that they're probably they're ready for the next flip-flop from the United States, from going from like this America first to UN first style thing, which we saw with Trump and then Biden, Trump again. So most of these countries are probably just saying, yeah, we'll get some weapons, but then the next time they go totally crazy with their next election, we'll have to reframe it after that. So there's these positions where you kind of state yourself as like this long-term investment, but you're also very volatile. I'm talking about America right now in terms of how flip-floppy you get every 4 years. All right. So we got that's that. So, trade deals are kind of way above my pay grade, but it does go to show that at the current state of things, we got it's like China and Japan are on other side. China and the United States are on other side of Japan, and Japan's holding both of their hands, and they're walking down the street, and China's like pulling Japan one way, and then America's pulling Japan the other way. Then China pulls back. China starts threatening. You don't want to do that. America's like, listen, son, we need 5% now. Japan is in such a weakened state. Doesn't know what to do. All right. There's that. Moving back to the BRICS sides of things. How long have we been going here? Only 20 minutes. So, going back and forth, looking around the supply chain wars around the world. If you're not paying attention to this, I think it's just silly. But the 17th BRICS Summit in Rio de Janeiro earlier this month marked a pivotal moment for the bloc, signaling its growing influence in a shifting global order. Oh, by the way, I condense a lot of these articles from original sources. If you're interested in these sources, go over to MatthewPMBigelow.com, the official site of the Japan WUT podcast, and I link all the articles that I talk about. I'm not making things up. I use the large language models, and I disclaim those so that you know. But the actual information can be found, and, go for it if you're that interested, and you should be. And I know you are because you're smart. You're so smart. This represented by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and addressed virtually by President Vladimir Putin, Russia emphasized the decline of Western-led globalization and the rise of the Global South. The summit produced 126 commitments across global governance, finance, healthcare, climate, AI, and sustainable development, with the declaration, strengthening Global South cooperation, advocating for multilateralism and a fair world order. A significant shift was BRICS' unified condemnation of Ukrainian attacks on Russian civilian infrastructure, marking a departure from its historically cautious stance on security issues. This suggests BRICS is evolving into a cohesive political and moral force defending territorial integrity with international norms. So there's that. So this one, they solidified BRICS' ambition to shape a multipolar world. The bloc advocated financial sovereignty, promoting transactions in national currencies to reduce reliance on Western-dominated systems. Agreements are aimed to boost multi-investments and develop independent payment mechanisms, fostering economic autonomy as a foundation for political independence. There, I almost missed that paragraph, but that's the whole reason I put it in there. If you look at what just China did with Egypt and what this paragraph is saying, it's basically the same thing, especially aimed at mutual investments and develop independent payment mechanisms, fostering economic autonomy. So again, not using the dollar. Yeah, so there's that. That's the BRICS summit. A major part of this is gold. If these countries want to work together and have some sort of working trade relationship that doesn't end up being political in nature, like the politicalization of the U.S. dollar, they have to have gold. So if you have gold and I have gold, we can meet on gold. And Russia plans to trade gold on the St. Petersburg Exchange. Again, this is a big one for BRICS. Russia, the world's second largest gold producer, is to free itself from the current dependence on gold prices on the London Stock Exchange and plans to launch gold trading on the St. Petersburg Exchange by the end of the year. One of the main objectives of the exchange when launching a new market is to ensure the formation of representative indicators of a competitive market price. Until recently, gold market participants relied on price benchmarks set by the London Stock Exchange. Now, that exchange will face competition. We noted the gradual movement away from Western-based trading and research facilities with the Russian establishment of the Institute of Oil and Gas Initiatives. However, London does have a massive repository of foreign gold, as has New York, but it doesn't own, apart from the UK's own reserves, most of this stock. Meanwhile, Russia is not only one of the largest gold producers, but also stores its own gold in Russia. This means that Russian gold purchases for storage in its own reserves, instead of storing currencies from unfriendly countries, has become an important step towards de-dollarization and financial independence. As a result, Russia may be able to reduce its dependence on the prices of precious metals issued by the London Stock Exchange. And then Russia can also trade that with other BRICS nations, notably China. That's kind of interesting. Big news there. And final one this is tying into trade as well. Going back to Sergei Lavrov. This comes to us from tvbricks.com. Very interesting site. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Russia conducts 90% of trade with BRICS countries in national currencies. So, of course, the dollar is the current reserve currency and everybody wants to trade in dollars. But this is a drip, salami slice taking of market share from the U.S. dollar. When the G7 kicked Russia off of the SWIFT system for its invasion of Ukraine, a lot of countries around the world said, well, America's not short on invasions of its own, so what is this double standard? Now, you could be on one side or another side and agree or disagree with that, but that's how a lot of people see it. And they say, well, reserve currencies never last forever. Maybe it's time to start sniffing around for the next best thing. The BRICS states are working to ensure smooth settlements, and significant progress has already been made. The share of national currencies in Russia's trade with the countries of the group reached 90% by the end of 2024. This was stated by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in an interview with Brazilian newspaper O Globo. Among our priorities and work on building sustainable payment mechanisms, the declaration of the 2024 BRICS Kazan Summit mentioned the cross-border payment initiative, settlement and clearing infrastructure, reinsurance company, new investment platform, he stressed, adding that these initiatives imply the creation of favorable conditions for the growth of trade and investment. I think that's fine there. So just as a final wrap up there, Russia conducts 90% of trade with BRICS countries in national currencies. So that's there's a lot of BRICS countries. There's, of course, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, but many other countries are joining as well. And there's that. So that's the supply chain wars for today. Japan, not allowed to leave the reservation, it seems, not allowed to pursue its own interests, not allowed to play on both sides of the coin, and getting sucked back into the American infrastructure. Although it doesn't really have a choice because America has so many bases, army bases here. And anyways, there's that. So the supply chain wars, BRICS. The main thing, though, is that despite all of this, the BRICS side seems to be progressing in a less politicized manner. They're focused on establishing cross-border trade agreements, focused on figuring out how to trade with their own currencies and use technology to make that happen, backed by gold, as opposed to an ideological framework where America kind of advertises itself as your best friend and just wants to do business with you. But everybody's kind of getting to the point where they know that every 4 years, the entire situation could just change willy-nilly, and that we should not live on a long-term international established system that's based on the whims of a very fickle people, Americans. Die for the war, everybody move. Die for the good, die for the war, die for the war. All right, so let's take a look at Japan Society 5.0.
The fourth industrial revolution will enable us to create a new society.
About time.
Artificial intelligence will transform the big data collected through the Internet of Things into new wisdom. Society 5.0, a technology-based, human-centered society. The fourth industrial revolution will raise our standard of living and solve various challenges we face. It will, for example, free us from the stress of driving, allowing us to safely visit anyone, anytime. We will have access to the latest medical advancements at a low cost, no matter where we are. AI and robots will enhance human ability and expand our infinite possibilities, helping us enjoy more fulfilling lives. Society 5.0, for the betterment of human lives.
Thank you. So that's the Japanese government promo jingle song thing about Japan Society 5.0, which is the World Economic Forum term, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Very tight there. There's kind of two branches of Japan Society 5.0. There's the bootstrappers, people who go, I like this technology, I want to make some products with it. Then there's the other side, the ideological side. We can collect SDG stamps by doing this stuff. But today we're going to be focusing a little bit on not that. The first article for today, you know, how the topic here of artificial intelligence, when we see it applied into the infrastructure around us, it's naturally dystopian, even though we can understand how efficient it is. For example, the facial recognition systems that are going on at airports all around the world, where people kind of show up at the airport and they're like, oh, I didn't have to show my boarding pass. It was all done with facial recognition. And you kind of go, well, it was smooth, but dystopian. It's like this. It's always kind of like that. They had this thing going on and with this technology, and it was A, B, C, or D, and it was dystopian. I don't really find large language models dystopian. It's kind of akin to a browser where you just type in something and it responds to you. So it's not really following you around the room or tracking your bone movements with special cameras or something like that. But this first one is this example of normative dystopia. Maybe that's the title of today's podcast. Normative dystopia. And I'll explain it here. So Osaka Prefecture to ban people aged 65 and over from making phone calls in front of ATMs. And there's a new AI camera technology to combat fraud. This comes to us from news.ntv.co.jp on July 23rd, 2025. So this is normative dystopia. In an effort to reduce damage caused by the increasing number of special frauds, a new technology using AI has been introduced to ATMs in Osaka Prefecture. On the 23rd, when I visited a financial institute at Daito City, Osaka Prefecture, a small camera was placed in front of the ATM. This is the normative dystopia. There's just a camera on an ATM. You know, you've seen cameras, you've seen ATMs, you know about CCTV. It was jointly developed by the police and Osaka Electrocommunication University. This is translated, machine translated, so this might not be the most accurate translation of the places. And is said to be equipped with AI. When it detects the movement of an ATM user talking on a mobile phone, it automatically sounds an alarm. This may be a transfer fraud. Please end the call. That's what the alarm sound does. So I have this video here, and I'm just going to play the audio selected, which is appropriate for podcast form. And this shows an older woman coming into an ATM and we're holding up a phone, and it's in Japanese, so you get the chance here to listen to some Japanese news.
警察と大阪電気通信大学が共同で開発し、AI を搭載しているといいます。
An old woman comes
ATM の
in.
利用者が携帯電話で通話する動きを検知すると、
振り込め詐欺の可能性があります。通話を終了してください。
So it showed an old woman going into an ATM. She's holding up an phone, and she says on the phone, ATM ni kimasu, or kimashita. She said, I'm at the ATM now. And then this camera with next to a speaker goes, woo, 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 and you heard it.
振り込め詐欺の可能性があります。
携帯電話で通話する動きを検知すると、
振り込め詐欺の可能性があります。通話を終了してください。
And there we go. Normative dystopia. You know, end the call now. It could be a scam, basically is what it was saying. But what if there's situations now where in some ATMs you need to use your phone in front of an ATM? There might be something delivered like a code to your phone, and you enter that into the phone, and then it sends it back into the network, and then the ATM opens up or something like that. Normative dystopia. You can't use your phone here. Now please use your phone. Something like that. This is, of course, entirely ridiculous. People, anyways, so normative dystopia and Japan Society 5.0, this is a side of it that obviously is highly unusual and stupid, actually. As if you need cameras and everything shouting at you to stop making a call because you might be being scammed by somebody. I don't know about that. Anyways, so there's that. And did you know about that? Next, we're going to be taking a look at something else. AI agents are changing the future of everybody's work. The AI agent is basically an employee, but it's an AI agent. It's an AI employee that companies can hire to do things in their computers, like populate graphs or create slides or do a whole bunch of things that take normal people way too long to do, and it slows down the company. But, you know, my theory is that once the middle managers get their hold, like if you have a company with a giant HR department and a whole bunch of middle managers, they're going to be using this technology, and it will become even slower and worse in the long run, because all of the people that I know that are really good at their jobs in big corporations are the technical staff, like the engineers, the artists, but not the middle managers. So what probably is going to happen is that all of these AI tools will be specifically designed to replace technicians and give the middle managers finally the tools they need to do middle management better, but they're just going to make it worse because they don't have the actual human skill level of a lot of the technicians that are being sent packing. But anyways, SoftBank, which is where I worked from 2015 to 2020, have been on a real push for AI. They've been doing so for a long time. The CEO, Masayoshi Son, one of Japan's richest people and a singularitarian, he believes in the singularity, is kind of obsessed with this stuff, and I can't blame him. but he is working with OpenAI, and that's ChatGPT, to create a massive amount of agents. And this is coming to us from aismiley.co.jp. 1 billion AI agents concept and crystal intelligence. So every year SoftBank has its SoftBank festival or announcement thing, and it's called SoftBank World, just like how Apple does it and most big companies do it. Just a way to get everybody in on what's coming next. And he says 1 billion AI agents concept and crystal intelligence. So when we're thinking about the future of work and how so many young people now are studying to get jobs at corporations, but you already have kind of boomers like Masa-san planning to replace most of the workforce. Like, what are these young people going to do? We don't really know. We haven't really asked these questions yet. And people wonder why so many young people are turning away from traditional political parties. Because you're getting screwed. You're doing everything right, and at the last moment, a boomer says, no, we're replacing you. Go away. Sun announced plans to build about 1 billion AI agents across the SoftBank group, stating, we are moving forward with a plan to give each employee 1,000 AI agents, with 1 billion AI agents in operation across the entire company. The initiative is one of the goals of the Crystal Intelligence Project they are working on with OpenAI. The core of this initiative is a system where AI agents create AI agents. He explained that this will be achieved by incorporating a self-evolutionary mechanism whereby AI agents create and strengthen themselves, rather than having all the AI agents created by humans. Someone has applied for a patent for this mechanism. AI agents, the digital workforce that works even while you sleep. Someone highlighted a future in which AI agents will become a digital workforce that is constantly learning and evolving 24/7. He commented that the AI agents will set their own goals through reinforcement learning and will continue to evolve while receiving rewards. He said that even while humans are sleeping, the agents will interact with each other, increasing their knowledge and becoming a digital workforce that operates 24/7, 365. We are fast approaching a world in which AI agents will be operating constantly in all business areas, such as call centers and online shops, complementing and expanding human capabilities. They always put that at the end there. Complementing and expanding human capabilities. You know, I think a lot of these jobs are bullshit jobs, and a lot of people working in corporations kind of admit to that. You know, they make $70,000 a year, but, you know, they just go to a few meetings and they attend the meetings, and then they have a part in writing the minutes for the meetings. And, you know, if the company's making billions and billions of dollars, maybe it does have an obligation to spread that money around to a middle class so that the wider population at large expands with the company, creating a more prosperous world through employment. But if it's just become like a welfare system where you kind of show up and you do a meeting and then you go home and you make $70,000, isn't that kind of like a welfare system as well? There's like the two. It's a dilemma, but the fact that it doesn't really matter what you think or what I think. The fact of the matter is, billions of AI agents will soon be released into the workforce, and your workforce or my workforces. And the result of that will be the younger populations or people graduating right now will be not only competing with massive amounts of immigrants working for lower wages. They will also be competing with a digital AI workforce at the same time. So you have three kind of workforces: a native workforce, an AI workforce, and an immigrant workforce, all clamoring for the same size of the pie. If the pie grows, maybe that's good. But if not, it's just going to create more poverty, press down on wages, and create less of an optimistic future. And maybe in 20 years, we'll see. But at the same time, right now, it's massively disruptive. I'm sure they know what they're doing. They got some smart people working there. But at the same time, I also know that they have a very large middle management, and HR was increasing in size at that time too. And those people a lot of them are very competitive with each other, inter-office competition, because you're not really doing much. So you turn your ambitions towards rival divisions or rival people inside your own office. Could you imagine like a bunch of vengeful HR agents deploying thousands of AI, like a dozen or so vengeful HR workers deploying thousands of AI agents against each other, like an inter-office AI gossip warfare? It'd be crazy. A couple more, not much more on this side of things. Kind of a technical day today. Let's do this one. Japan's neuromorphic chips power AI revolution. So there's these new chips, and of course, one thing with AI is the amount of power it consumes. And so one way to mitigate the risk of over-reliance on AI without improving your infrastructure for energy is to create better chips. Neuromorphic chips mimic the brain's neural networks, using spiking neural networks, SNNs, to process data as event-driven spikes. Unlike traditional chips' binary operations, this parallel processing integrates memory and computation, cutting latency and power use. Unlike non-human architecture, which separates memory and processing, neuromorphic chips emulate synaptic connections, enabling efficient real-time AI tasks. Japan is capitalizing on this trend in AI and edge computing. Sony's neuromorphic image sensors, developed with Prophecy, use event-based processing to capture only visual changes, enhancing robotics and consumer tech like Bravia XR TVs, powered by the cognitive processor XR for human-like sensory processing. Sony's acquisition of Insightness bolsters its efforts. Toshiba's 2016 time domain neural network chip, presented at a conference, targets low-power IoT devices. In 2019, with Johns Hopkins University, Toshiba unveiled a chip mimicking hippocampal spatial perception, that's brain, at ISAS in Sapporo, enabling compact autonomous robots for infrastructure inspection. Use cases include 1. Autonomous robots. Neuromorphic chips enable robots to process sensory data in real time with minimal power, ideal for tasks like infrastructure monitoring. In one way, what this does is when using a whole bunch of remote robotics on site with cameras and stuff, if all of the pixels of a camera capture are always being analyzed, that's what a lot of the power is going to. So a lot of this stuff is at the pixel base, especially with cameras and AI connected cameras and networks and things like that. And as you know, transmitting or saving, you've saved a video before and you've saved an audio file before, like the size and those things are massive in terms of their difference. So if you can have an AI robot that only monitors the differentiation in pixels. So if it's like an infrastructure monitoring robot and it's going past a pipe and the pixels on the pipe from 1 o'clock and it goes past again at 6 o'clock, if the pixels on the pipe are the same, then it won't spend a lot of memory processing those two passings. But if there's like a black mark suddenly and the pixels are black, right, in the capture, then it will analyze that there is a change and a differentiation, and that will consume the computer's power. So this is why neuromorphic chips in one way are much more efficient than most other chips, because you don't have to have everything being monitored at maximum attention all the time. You know how you can, if you're going home a new way, everything is like crazy. Oh, I didn't know that was there. What's this? But if you take that route 75 times, eventually you don't even notice anything anymore. And you might not even remember walking past a lot of those places once you arrive home, because your brain goes into that kind of neuromorphic state where it doesn't always just process everything that your eyes are taking in. But if you're walking home and on that pathway on the 76th time and suddenly there's a crane outside of a house you like and it's being demolished, you're going to be like, oh my God, that house I really like is being demolished. And that spike will occur. That consumes your brain consumption or something like that. And that's what these neuromorphic chips are trying to achieve, is using the power of the computer, not all the time at 100%, but to limit it to where differentiations occur when a camera viewing something at time A is different from time B then those pixels get analyzed. But if it's not different, 10 times later, then those pixels won't get analyzed. Something like that. Anyways, it's neuromorphic chips are the very technical side of things, but Japan's neuromorphic chips power AI revolution. I don't know if you're into future AI trends and stuff like that, but I often look at this stuff and 3 or 4 years later, sometimes they're everywhere all the time now, or not. But the R&D stage proposes it in one way, and then it gets used in applications in another way, and then it enters the market in another way, but still it found a way through the R&D phase into the market phase. And sometimes they sell hundreds of millions of these things a year, or sometimes it flops. But anyways, neuromorphic chips. But the idea of instead of installing 20 new nuclear power plants, why not have one plant produce these chips that require the surveillance equipment to reduce dramatically the amount of power it's using? Now you don't need 20 nuclear power plants. You can just build 4, something like that. Maybe that's the long-term strategy on these types of things. All right, and I think that's going to cover it for today. Normative Dystopia. But I hope you enjoyed that. Looking back at the BRICS stuff, the Chinese just kind of expanding everywhere all the time and getting everybody, not everybody, but getting more and more people in on their system. Very interesting. And the bravado that the Americans kind of have relied on for the past 50 to 100 years is somewhat fading now. And more people of the global south are maybe thinking we don't want to use the U.S. dollar. We would rather just do exchanges. But what's on the other side of that exchange would be the reliance on Chinese technology. And if they don't like you, maybe they will just turn it off and not tell anyone. And suddenly, somebody in your government is assassinated, and then the Chinese government turns that equipment back on again. And wow, look, it works perfectly, and everybody's happy again. We're not really sure where these things will settle politically far from now. But anyways, at the meantime, we can obviously see that de-dollarization is occurring. It's a salami slice approach, which is the Chinese way. And it's the Chinese ancient secret, as it were. And Japan is on one side, geographically, firmly implanted into Asia, but ideologically it's within the G7. And we're on the edge of the empire as well. So if the seams move on this edge, then we are going to feel the ripples and ramifications of this. And hopefully Japan can be more stable internally, but we're not seeing that right now. All right, that's going to be the podcast for today. Thank you for listening to the Japan WUT podcast, episode 220. Go to MatthewPMBigelow.com or leave a donation at paypal.me/JapanWUT. That's paypal.me/JapanWUT. All right, till the next time, everybody, have a good one. And a heartful mata ne.
You